The whistle of the train pierced the afternoon air as it pulled into Genoa, Nevada, its iron wheels screeching against the tracks before coming to a halt with a gust of steam. Winifred Calloway clutched her small valise with trembling hands, her heart hammering against her ribs as she prepared to meet the man who would become her husband. The journey from Boston had been long, each mile carrying her further from the life she knew into an uncertain future in this wild territory. The year was 1876, and like many women seeking escape from destitution back east, Winifred had answered an advertisement in the matrimonial news. The promise of security with a successful rancher named Harold Dempsey had seemed like salvation when she'd been facing eviction after her father's death left her penniless. Now, standing on wobbly legs as the conductor called for passengers to disembark, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Winnie, as she'd been called back home, adjusted her worn bonnet to better shield her face and took a deep breath before stepping down onto the wooden platform. The bright Nevada sun hit her eyes, making her wince and causing a sharp pain to shoot through her bruised cheekbone. She kept her gaze lowered, not wanting to draw attention to the purple marks that bloomed across her pale skin, evidence of her brother-in-law's rage when he discovered her plans to leave. As passengers bustled around her, Winnie scanned the platform for a man matching the description in Harold's letters, tall with graying hair and a prominent mustache. She had memorized every detail, including the blue handkerchief he promised to wear in his breast pocket for identification. Instead, her attention was drawn to a tall, broad-shouldered man leaning against a post at the edge of the platform. Unlike the other townspeople dressed in their Sunday best to greet the arriving train, he wore dusty denims and a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-bronzed forearms. His dark hat was pulled low, but she could see his eyes watching the passengers intently. As Winnie stepped fully onto the platform, the setting sun caught her face, illuminating the deep purple bruise on her cheek and the smaller ones encircling her wrist. The tall cowboy straightened immediately, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto her injuries. Then, with purposeful strides, he crossed the platform toward her. "Miss Calloway?" he asked, his voice deep but quiet. Winnie's breath caught. "How do you know my name?" she asked, taking an instinctive step backward. "Harold Dempsey sent me to fetch you," he replied, though something in his eyes hardened as they traced the outline of the bruise on her face. "I'm Bryce Xavier. I work at the Flying D Ranch." Winnie relaxed slightly. "Yes, I'm Winifred Calloway. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Xavier." "Is Mr. Dempsey not able to come himself?" The disappointment in her voice was evident, though she tried to hide it. Bryce's jaw tightened. "He's occupied." He reached for her valise. "Let me help you with that." As Winnie extended her arm, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing more pronounced bruising around her wrist. Bryce froze, his gaze locked on the marks. "Did Harold do this?" he asked, his voice suddenly razor-sharp. Confusion swept across Winnie's face. "No, of course not. I haven't even met Mr. Dempsey yet." Something in Bryce's expression changed, relief, perhaps, mixed with a simmering anger. "Then who did?" Winnie tugged her sleeve down. "It's not important. My past is behind me now." Bryce studied her for a long moment, seeming to make a decision. "Miss Calloway, there's something you should know about Harold Dempsey before you." His words were cut short by the appearance of an older man pushing through the crowd. Harold Dempsey was exactly as he described himself, tall with steel-gray hair and an impressive waxed mustache. His suit was finely tailored, and a blue silk handkerchief peeked from his breast pocket. His face, however, bore none of the warmth his letters had promised. His eyes were cold as they assessed Winifred from head to toe. "So you're the girl," he said, not bothering with introductions. His gaze lingered on her bruised cheek, and something like satisfaction flickered in his eyes. "Damaged goods, I see. That wasn't mentioned in your letters." Winifred flinched as if she'd been slapped. "Mr. Dempsey, no matter," Harold interrupted, reaching for her arm with fingers like talons. "You'll do, come along." Before his hand could close around her wrist, Bryce stepped between them. "She's not going with you, Harold." The older man's face darkened. "What did you say, boy?" "She's my mail-order bride. Paid good money for her passage." Bryce didn't budge. "You've gone through 3 brides in the past 2 years, Harold. This stops now." Winnie looked from one man to the other, confusion and fear building inside her. "I don't understand." Harold's face contorted with rage. "This is none of your concern, Xavier. I'll deal with your insubordination later. Now step aside." "No," Bryce said firmly, and then turned to look at Winnie. His eyes softened as they met hers. "You're not going to him, Miss Calloway. I can't let you." Harold's hand moved to his waistcoat, where Winnie could see the outline of a small pistol. "This woman is my property. I have the contract right here." "She's a person, not property," Bryce countered, seemingly unafraid of the implied threat. "And I know what happened to Anna Mitchell and Sarah Collins." At the mention of these names, Harold's face paled slightly before his anger returned twofold. "Those women were clumsy. Accidents happen." "Accidents?" Bryce's voice was dangerously low. "Is that what you call broken ribs and a fractured jaw?" Winnie gasped, her hand flying to her bruised cheek as understanding dawned. She took a deliberate step away from Harold and closer to Bryce. Harold's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this, Xavier. No one in Genoa will hire you after I'm through." He turned his cold gaze to Winnie. "And you'll wish you'd honored our arrangement." Bryce stood firm. "Leave now, Harold, before I forget myself in front of the good people of this town." For a tense moment, Winnie thought Harold might draw his pistol. Instead, he spat on the platform near Bryce's boots, turned on his heel and stalked away. As Harold disappeared into the crowd, Winnie's knees nearly buckled. Bryce's hand on her elbow steadied her. "Are you all right, Miss Calloway?" She nodded shakily. "I think so. But what happens now? I've spent every penny I had on the train ticket here." Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't break down in front of this stranger who just saved her from what sounded like a horrible fate. Bryce picked up her valise. "First, we get you somewhere safe. My sister Martha runs the boarding house just down the street. She'll have a room for you." "But I can't pay. We'll worry about that later," Bryce assured her. "Right now, you need rest and a hot meal." As they walked away from the station, Winnie cast one backward glance at the train that had brought her here. There was no going back now. Whatever lay ahead, at least she'd escaped one danger, thanks to this quiet cowboy with kind eyes who'd appeared out of nowhere like an answer to a prayer she hadn't even known to make. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure with a wide front porch adorned with potted geraniums. As Bryce and Winnie approached, a plump woman with graying hair pulled back in a tidy bun appeared at the door, her hands on her hips and a worried expression on her face. "Bryce Xavier, what in heaven's name is going on?" "I just saw Harold Dempsey storming down the street like a bear with a thorn in his paw, cursing your name to high heaven." Her gaze shifted to Winnie and her eyes widened at the sight of the bruises. "Oh, my dear Martha, this is Miss Winifred Calloway," Bryce said. "She needs a place to stay." Martha's expression softened immediately. "Of course she does. Come in, come in." She ushered them inside, leading them to a cozy sitting room. "You sit right there, honey. I'll fetch some tea." Once Martha had bustled off to the kitchen, Winnie turned to Bryce. "Those women you mentioned, what really happened to them?" Bryce removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. He ran a hand through it, clearly uncomfortable. Harold Dempsey has a reputation in this town, though many turn a blind eye because of his wealth and influence. He's brought 3 mail-order brides to Genoa in the past few years. The first, Elizabeth, disappeared after 6 months. Harold claimed she ran off with a traveling salesman, but no one ever saw her leave. He paused, his expression grim. Anna Mitchell arrived next, sweet girl from Pennsylvania. 3 weeks after the wedding, she fell down the stairs and broke her arm and several ribs. The doc didn't believe it, but Anna was too terrified to say otherwise. She died that winter pneumonia, they said, but she was only 22 and healthy when she arrived. Winnie's hand covered her mouth. And Sarah Collins, she came last spring, lasted 4 months before she threw herself into the Carson River. At least, that's what Harold claimed. Her body was found with bruises that couldn't have come from the river. Bryce's fists clenched. I worked for him then, too. Saw the way he treated her. I tried to help, but he shook his head. I was too late. That's why you stopped him today, Winnie whispered. You didn't want me to become the next Elizabeth or Anna or Sarah. Bryce met her eyes directly. I wasn't about to let another woman walk into that monster's house. Martha returned with a tray of tea and fresh biscuits, setting it on the small table between them. Now, Miss Calloway, you drink this while I ready a room for you. You must be exhausted from your journey. Thank you, Mrs. Winnie began. Just Martha, dear. I'm a widow these past 5 years. It's just me running this place now, with some help from my brother here when he's not busy being a hero. She gave Bryce an affectionate pat on the shoulder before bustling upstairs. Once they were alone again, Winnie asked the question that had been nagging at her. If you knew what kind of man Harold Dempsey is, why do you work for him? Bryce's expression darkened. I don't anymore. I quit 2 weeks ago after finding Sarah's diary hidden in the barn. But I knew he had another bride coming. His eyes met hers. I couldn't let it happen again. So you came to the station looking for me specifically? Winnie asked, surprised. Yes, though I didn't know your name until I overheard the station master mention it. I just knew Harold was expecting a bride on today's train. He hesitated. I'm sorry about what happened at the station. You must be overwhelmed. Winnie managed a small smile. Actually, I'm grateful. It seems you saved me from a fate far worse than the one I was fleeing. She traced the bruise on her cheek absently. My brother-in-law wasn't pleased when he found out I'd answered a matrimonial advertisement. He felt I should have accepted his generosity after my sister died. Understanding dawned in Bryce's eyes. He did this to you, when he nodded. Victor believed I belonged to him after Emily passed. When I refused his advances and told him I was leaving, he showed me exactly what he thought of my decision. Her voice grew quiet. I slipped out that night and left everything behind except what I could carry in this valise. And now you're here with no funds and no prospects, Bryce said, concern etching his features. I suppose so, Winnie admitted, though it's still better than the alternatives. She straightened her shoulders. I'm not afraid of hard work. I'll find employment. Martha returned before Bryce could respond. Your room is ready, dear. It's small but clean with a lovely view of the mountains. I can't thank you enough, Winnie began, but I should tell you I have very little money to pay for lodging. Martha waved away her concern. We'll work something out. Perhaps you can help around the boarding house until you find your feet. Relief washed over Winnie. I'd be most grateful for that arrangement. Bryce stood, retrieving his hat from the table. I should be going, got some matters to attend to. Will I see you again? Winnie asked, then blushed at her forwardness. A smile touched Bryce's lips, transforming his serious face. Count on it, Miss Calloway. He tipped his hat to both women and headed for the door. Bryce, Martha called after him. Be careful. Harold Dempsey isn't a man who forgives easily. I know, he replied. his expression hardening once more. "But neither am I." After he'd gone, Martha showed Winnie to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. True to Martha's description, the window offered a stunning view of the Sierra Nevada mountains in the distance, their peaks touched with the last golden rays of sunset. "You rest now," Martha said kindly. "Tomorrow will be soon enough to figure out your next steps." Left alone, Winnie sank onto the bed, exhaustion washing over her. For the first time since leaving Boston, she allowed herself to cry not from despair, but from sheer relief. She had escaped Victor's cruelty only to nearly fall into the hands of a man who sounded even more dangerous. Yet somehow, against all odds, she had found safety and kindness in this strange town. As sleep finally claimed her, Winnie's last thoughts were of the quiet cowboy with determined eyes who had appeared like a guardian angel on that train platform. Bryce Xavier. A man who had stood between her and harm without knowing anything about her, except that she needed help. In a world that had shown Winnie little kindness, this small act of decency felt like the most precious gift imaginable. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Winnie's room, gently waking her. For a moment, disorientation seized her as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Then yesterday's events came flooding back the train, Harold Dempsey's cold eyes, and Bryce Xavier's intervention that had likely saved her life. A soft knock at the door roused her fully. "Miss Calloway," Martha's voice called. "Breakfast is ready whenever you are, dear." "Thank you," Winnie replied, quickly rising to splash water on her face from the basin provided. She dressed in her one decent day dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was still presentable. She attempted to arrange her chestnut hair to hide the worst of the bruising, which had begun to fade from purple to a sickly yellow-green. When she descended the stairs, she found the boarding house's dining room occupied by several other guests, a silver-haired couple who introduced themselves as the Pendergasts, retired shopkeepers from Sacramento visiting their grandchildren, a young man named Thomas Fletcher who worked at the bank, and a quiet woman in her 30s who taught at the local school. "This is Miss Winifred Calloway," Martha announced as she set a plate of eggs and biscuits before Winnie. "She'll be staying with us for a while and helping me around the house." The others welcomed her warmly, asking polite questions about her journey that Winnie answered vaguely. No one mentioned her bruises, though she caught the schoolteacher, Miss Abigail Palmer, studying them with knowing concern. After breakfast, as the other boarders departed for their various activities, Abigail approached Winnie privately. "If you ever need someone to talk to," she said quietly, "my door is always open. The school is just 2 blocks east of here." Touched by the unexpected offer, Winnie thanked her. It seemed Genoa held more kindness than she had dared to hope. Martha put Winnie to work immediately, showing her the routine of the boarding house, changing linens, sweeping, dusting, and helping prepare meals. The work was honest and straightforward, and Winnie threw herself into it gratefully. "You're a natural," Martha commented as they kneaded bread dough side by side that afternoon. "Most city girls I've met wouldn't know the first thing about keeping house." "My mother died when I was young," Winnie explained. "My sister Emily and I learned to manage on our own while Father worked." Then when Emily married Victor, she hesitated. "Well, let's just say he preferred his wife to focus on social obligations. So many household duties fell to me." Martha nodded understandingly. "Sounds like you've had your share of burdens to bear, child." Before Winnie could respond, the front door opened, and Bryce's tall figure appeared. He removed his hat as he entered, and Winnie couldn't help noticing how the gesture revealed the way his dark hair curled slightly at his temples. He carried a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Ladies," he greeted them with a nod. "How are you feeling today, Miss Calloway?" "Much better after a good night's rest," Winnie replied, suddenly conscious of the flour dusting her apron and the loose tendrils of hair that had escaped her hasty bun. "And please call me Winifred. Or Winnie if you prefer." A smile touched his lips. "Winnie then, and I'm Bryce." He placed the bundle on the table. "I brought you something. It isn't much, but I thought it might help." Curious, Winnie unwrapped the paper to find a small jar of salve and a book of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. "The salve is from Doc Sullivan," Bryce explained, "for your bruises, and the book. Well, I remembered you mentioned poetry in the stagecoach office yesterday, and Martha said you might enjoy some reading material." Winnie was momentarily speechless at the thoughtful gesture. "I did mention enjoying poetry, but I don't recall saying so to you." Bryce's tanned skin darkened slightly with a blush. "You were speaking to the woman seated next to you on the bench. I might have overheard." "You were observing me before you even knew who I was?" Winnie asked, surprised. "I was watching for Harold's bride," Bryce corrected, though his eyes held something more. "But yes, I noticed you right away, even before I realized that I was the poor soul intended for Harold Dempsey." Winnie finished for him, trying to keep her tone light despite the shiver that ran through her at the name. "That's not how I would have put it," Bryce said quietly. Martha, who had been observing this exchange with interest, cleared her throat. "Bryce, since you're here, why don't you stay for dinner? I'm making my famous chicken and dumplings." "I'd like that," he agreed, his eyes still on Winnie. "Wonderful," Martha said. "Now I need to fetch more flour from the cellar." "Winnie, perhaps you could show Bryce to the sitting room while I'm gone." As Martha disappeared downstairs, Winnie wiped her hands on her apron and led Bryce to the cozy sitting room at the front of the house. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "Your sister is very kind," Winnie said as they sat on the floral-patterned sofa. "I don't know what I would have done without her generosity." "Martha has always had a soft heart for those in need," Bryce replied. "After her husband died, she turned this place into a sanctuary of sorts. More than one lost soul has found their footing under this roof." Winnie traced the embossed cover of the poetry book. "And what about you? Were you born here in Genoa?" Bryce shook his head. "No, I came west from Missouri after the war, served with the Union Army, though I was just a boy when I enlisted, lied about my age." A shadow crossed his face. "Saw enough suffering to last several lifetimes." "I'm sorry," Winnie said softly. "The war took my older brother. He was with General Sherman on the march to the sea." "I was there too," Bryce said, surprise evident in his voice. "What was his name? Perhaps I knew him." "William Calloway. He served with the 103rd Ohio." Bryce shook his head regretfully. "I was with the 15th Missouri. Different division." He paused, studying her face. "Is that why you came west? Because of the memories?" Winnie considered the question. "Partly. After Father died this spring, there was nothing left for me in Boston except my sister's widower and he." She gestured vaguely toward her bruised face. "Let's just say he made it clear what my position would be if I stayed." Anger flashed in Bryce's eyes. "Some men don't deserve the title." "No," Winnie agreed. "But what about you? What brought you to Genoa specifically?" "Land," Bryce answered simply. "I had some savings from my army pay and wanted a place of my own. Nevada territory was still opening up when I arrived in '68. I purchased a small parcel south of town, just 50 acres, but good grazing land with a creek running through it." "You have your own ranch?" Winnie asked, surprised. "But I thought you worked for Harold Dempsey." Bryce's expression darkened. "My place isn't much compared to Dempsey's spread. I took work with him to earn extra money while I built up my herd. Started with just 5 head of cattle." Now I've got 32, plus 3 good horses. Pride entered his voice as he spoke of his land, and Winnie found herself drawn to his quiet determination. Here was a man who had carved something from nothing through sheer will and hard work. "It sounds wonderful," she said sincerely. "It's modest," he corrected, "but it's mine. Free and clear." He hesitated. "I haven't been back there since I quit Dempsey's employ. Been staying in town, keeping an eye on things." Understanding dawned. "You've been watching for me for Harold's bride. How long have you been planning to intervene?" "Since I found Sarah's diary," he admitted. "I knew then I couldn't let another woman fall into his hands. When I learned he had a bride arriving yesterday, I made sure to be there." "At great personal risk," Winnie observed. "Harold Dempsey seems like a powerful enemy to make." Bryce's jaw tightened. "Some things are worth the risk." The intensity in his gaze made Winnie's heart skip. Before she could respond, Martha called from the kitchen that dinner was nearly ready. As they rose, Bryce's hand brushed Winnie's, sending an unexpected jolt of awareness through her. She drew back, startled by her reaction to this near stranger who had already upended her life in ways she was still processing. "Thank you for the book," she said quickly, needing to break the moment. "Poetry has always been a comfort to me." "You're welcome," Bryce replied, his deep voice gentler than before. "Everyone deserves some beauty in their life, especially after hardship." Throughout dinner, Winnie found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Bryce as he conversed easily with his sister and the other boarders who joined them. There was a quiet strength about him that she found compelling, not the bullying dominance of men like Victor or Harold Dempsey, but something far more profound. As the meal concluded and Bryce prepared to leave, he paused beside Winnie's chair. "I have some business in Carson City tomorrow, but I'll return the day after. Perhaps you might allow me to show you around Genoa then, if you're feeling up to it." Winnie was conscious of Martha watching them with poorly concealed interest. "I would like that very much," she replied. After Bryce had gone, Martha busied herself with clearing the table, humming a cheerful tune. "Your brother is a good man," Winnie observed as she helped stack the dishes. Martha's eyes twinkled. "One of the best, though I might be biased." She studied Winnie for a moment. "He's been alone too long. After what he saw in the war, he kept people at a distance, but lately," she smiled, "lately I've seen something change in him." That night, as Winnie prepared for bed, she found herself drawn to the window, gazing out at the star-filled Nevada sky. Her life had taken such an unexpected turn in just 24 hours. She had come to Genoa to marry a stranger out of desperate necessity, only to be rescued by another stranger whose quiet decency stirred feelings she hadn't known herself capable of after all she'd endured. She opened the poetry book Bryce had given her, finding comfort in the familiar verses. One poem in particular caught her eye, "How Do I Love Thee?" The passion in the words made her wonder if she would ever experience such profound emotion. As she drifted toward sleep, Winnie's thoughts turned to Bryce Xavier, to his kind eyes and gentle hands that had never once made her flinch, unlike every other man she'd known these past years. Perhaps, she thought as sleep claimed her, perhaps here in this unexpected place, she might find not just safety but something more precious still. 2 days later, Winnie stood on the boarding house porch, watching as Bryce approached on horseback. The morning sun glinted off his dark hair as he removed his hat in greeting, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach at the sight of him. "Good morning," he called, dismounting with easy grace. He secured his horse, a handsome chestnut, gelding, to the hitching post. "I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all," Winnie assured him, smoothing her skirt nervously. She had spent extra time on her appearance that morning, arranging her hair to best conceal the fading bruises, and wearing the nicest of her 3 dresses, a sage green cotton that Martha had helped her press to perfection. Bryce's appreciative gaze suggested her efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you." Winnie's cheeks warmed at the compliment. "Martha tells me I should see the mercantile while we're out. She needs some sewing notions." "The mercantile it is, then," Bryce agreed, offering his arm, "and perhaps the lake afterward. It's not far, and there's no prettier sight in the territory." As they walked through Genoa, Bryce pointed out various establishments: the smithy, the assay office, the small church where services were held every Sunday regardless of whether the circuit preacher was in town. Townsfolk nodded greetings as they passed, though Winnie noticed some curious glances directed their way. "Word travels fast in a small town," Bryce explained when she mentioned it. "By now, everyone knows you were meant to be Harold Dempsey's bride, but are staying at Martha's instead." "Does that make me the subject of scandal?" Winnie asked, suddenly self-conscious. Bryce shook his head. "Most folks here know what kind of man Dempsey is, even if they won't say it openly. If anything, they're curious about you, and maybe a little concerned for your welfare." "Dempsey isn't known for accepting defeat gracefully." "Has there been trouble?" Winnie asked, her heart quickening. "Nothing direct," Bryce assured her. "Just whispers that he's been asking questions about you in town, but don't worry, you're safe at Martha's." They reached the mercantile, a large wooden building with a wide front porch and windows displaying everything from tools to fabric. A bell jingled as they entered the dim interior, which was packed floor to ceiling with merchandise of every description. "Mr. Xavier." A balding man with spectacles perched on his nose emerged from behind the counter. "Twice in 1 week, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Just showing Miss Calloway around town, Mr. Peterson," Bryce replied. "She's staying at Martha's boarding house and needs some sewing supplies." Mr. Peterson's eyes widened slightly as they fell on Winnie, and she knew he was connecting her to the gossip about Harold Dempsey's mail-order bride. To his credit, he recovered quickly, offering a warm smile. "Welcome to Genoa, Miss Calloway. Any friend of the Xaviers is a friend of mine. Now, what can I help you with today?" As Winnie selected thread and needles for Martha, she became aware of a woman watching her from near the fabric counter. Elegantly dressed in a burgundy traveling suit, the woman made no pretense of her interest, openly studying Winnie with sharp, calculating eyes. Bryce noticed too, his posture stiffening. "Mrs. Dempsey," he acknowledged with a curt nod. Winnie's heart skipped a beat. Harold Dempsey's wife. But he had been expecting a mail-order bride. Unless. The woman approached, her silk skirts rustling. She was perhaps 40, with carefully coiffed blonde hair and the kind of beauty that came from meticulous attention to appearance rather than natural gifts. "Mr. Xavier," she returned coolly, then turned her gaze to Winnie. "And you must be the latest acquisition. My husband ordered. I must say you're younger than the others, and prettier despite the obvious damage." Winnie stood frozen, unable to form a response to this bewildering situation. Bryce stepped slightly in front of her. "Mrs. Dempsey, I believe you've been misinformed." "Have I?" the woman asked with a brittle laugh. "I doubt it. Harold's pattern is quite established by now. He finds these desperate girls, brings them to Genoa with promises of security, and then—" She shrugged elegantly. "Well, we all know what happens then. You know," Winnie finally found her voice, horrified. "You know what he does to these women, and you do nothing." Mrs. Dempsey's painted lips curved in a smile devoid of warmth. "My dear, I spend most of my time in San Francisco, where the climate better suits my constitution. What Harold does in my absence is his business, as long as he continues to fund my lifestyle. Our arrangement has worked splendidly for nearly a decade." Disgust rose in Winnie's throat. "You're as bad as he is." "Perhaps," Mrs. Dempsey conceded, apparently unbothered by the accusation. "But I'm a survivor, and in this world that's what matters." She glanced at Bryce. "You've made an enemy of my husband, Mr. Xavier. That was foolish." "I've faced worse than Harold Dempsey," Bryce replied evenly. Mrs. Dempsey laughed again. "I doubt that very much." She turned back to Winnie. "A word of advice, my dear. Whatever protection you think this cowboy offers won't last. Harold always gets what he wants in the end, always." With that, she swept past them and out of the store, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume in her wake. Once she had gone, Winnie released a shaky breath. His wife knows. She knows what he does to those women and does nothing to stop it. "Vivian Dempsey is as cold-blooded as her husband," Bryce said grimly. "They deserve each other." Mr. Peterson, who had been pretending not to overhear the exchange, cleared his throat. "Don't you worry about the Dempseys, Miss Calloway. Not everyone in this town is under their thumb." As they left the mercantile, Winnie's earlier buoyant mood had evaporated. "Perhaps we should return to the boarding house," she suggested. "I don't want to cause any more scenes." Bryce touched her arm gently. "Don't let them ruin your day. Vivian Dempsey can't hurt you, and neither can Harold as long as I'm around." "But for how long will that be?" Winnie asked, echoing Mrs. Dempsey's implied warning. "I can't impose on your protection indefinitely, Bryce. I need to find a way to support myself, perhaps move on to another town." "Is that what you want?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "To leave Genoa?" Winnie considered the question as they walked toward the edge of town. The truth was, despite the cloud of Harold Dempsey's threats, she had begun to feel a tentative connection to this place, to Martha's kindness, to Abigail Palmer's friendly overtures, and most of all to the quiet cowboy walking beside her. "No," she admitted finally. "But I can't live in fear of that man forever, and I won't endanger you or Martha by staying." They had reached the shore of a small lake nestled against the mountains, its crystal-clear water reflecting the cloudless sky. Bryce led her to a flat rock overlooking the water where they sat side by side. "Winnie," he said after a moment, "I've been thinking about your situation. I may have a solution if you're willing to hear it." "Of course," she replied, curious. Bryce seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "I told you about my ranch. It's small but growing. The cabin I built is solid with 2 rooms and a good roof. There's a garden plot that hasn't been tended properly since I've been staying in town." He paused. "What I'm trying to say is, I need a housekeeper. Someone to cook and clean while I work the land. The position comes with room and board plus a small wage." Winnie stared at him, trying to process his offer. "You want me to work for you, at your ranch?" "It would be a strictly professional arrangement," Bryce hastened to add. "I would build a separate sleeping cabin for myself. Your reputation would be protected. And," he met her eyes directly, "you'd be far from town, far from Harold Dempsey's reach." The offer was tempting, a chance to earn her keep while maintaining her independence. Yet something in his careful phrasing disappointed her, though she couldn't articulate why. "That's very generous," she said slowly. "But wouldn't people talk? A single woman living on your property, even as an employee." "People will talk regardless," Bryce pointed out. "At least this way, you'd be safe. And I give you my word as a gentleman that you would be treated with nothing but respect." Winnie believed him. In the short time she'd known Bryce Xavier, she'd seen nothing but honorable behavior from him. Still, the arrangement he proposed would place her completely in his power, isolated from town. After her experiences with Victor and her narrow escape from Harold Dempsey, the thought made her uneasy. "May I think about it?" she asked finally. "Of course," Bryce agreed immediately. "Take all the time you need." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as an osprey dove into the lake and emerged with a fish in its talons. The serenity of the scene gradually restored Winnie's spirits. "It's beautiful here," she observed. "So different from Boston." "Do you miss the city?" Bryce asked. Winnie considered the question. "I miss certain things, the libraries, the concerts, the bustle of so many people, but I don't miss the soot and the noise and the way a woman alone is looked upon with suspicion or pity." She smiled slightly. "And I certainly don't miss the winters." "Nevada has its own kind of winters," Bryce warned. "The snow can pile higher than a man's head in the mountain passes. But without the damp that seeps into your bones," Winnie countered. "Father always said dry cold was kinder than wet cold." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Winnie agreed, a familiar sadness washing over her. "He taught mathematics at a boys' academy, always had his head in the clouds, full of numbers and theories. After my mother and brother died, he retreated further into his work. Emily and I practically raised ourselves. And your sister, you mentioned she married." Winnie's expression clouded. "Yes, Victor Elliot. He seemed charming at first, brought Emily flowers, took her to the theater. Father was delighted that she'd found a husband with prospects." She sighed. "We didn't know then what he was really like." "He hurt her too?" Bryce asked gently. Winnie nodded, fighting back tears. "Emily was too proud to admit it. She made excuses for his temper, blamed herself. When she died in childbirth last year along with the baby, Victor turned his attention to me. He said it was my duty to take my sister's place." Bryce's jaw tightened. "No man has the right to claim such a duty from a woman." "I agree," Winnie said, "which is why I ran. I'd rather take my chances with a stranger halfway across the country than endure one more day under Victor's roof." She looked at Bryce. "I had no idea the stranger might be worse than what I was fleeing." "Harold Dempsey is the exception, not the rule," Bryce assured her. "Most folks out here are decent, hard-working people just trying to build a life. People like you," Winnie said softly. Bryce's eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them, a current of understanding that went beyond their brief acquaintance. For a breathless moment, Winnie thought he might reach for her hand, or perhaps say something to acknowledge the connection she felt growing between them. Instead, he stood, offering his arm once more. "We should head back. Martha will be wondering where we've gotten to." As they walked back toward town, Winnie found herself wondering if she had imagined that moment of connection. Bryce seemed deliberately to keep the conversation light, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of local history, carefully avoiding any topic that might lead back to personal matters. By the time they reached the boarding house, the sun was beginning to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Martha met them at the door, her expression troubled. "There you are," she said, ushering them inside quickly. "I was getting worried. Is something wrong?" Bryce asked, immediately alert. Martha glanced at Winnie, then back to her brother. "Harold Dempsey was here looking for Miss Calloway. He was insistent." Fear fluttered in Winnie's chest. "What did he want?" "To speak with you privately," Martha replied. "I told him you weren't receiving visitors. He left this." She held out an envelope. "And said to tell you he's not a man who gives up easily on what belongs to him." Winnie's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Inside was a brief note written in a sharp, angular hand. "Miss Calloway, our arrangement stands. I paid for your passage and expect the services contracted. Return to me by week's end, or I shall be forced to take legal action to recover my investment." "Harold Dempsey, he can't do that, can he?" Winnie asked, passing the note to Bryce. "I never signed anything agreeing to marry him." Bryce's expression darkened as he read the note. "No, but these mail-order arrangements exist in a legal gray area. Dempsey has enough influence to make trouble, even without a formal contract." "What should I do?" Winnie asked, hating the fear in her voice. Bryce and Martha exchanged a look that spoke volumes. "I think," Bryce said carefully, "that you should reconsider my offer. The ranch is remote enough that Dempsey wouldn't easily find you there." Martha nodded her agreement. "It might be for the best, dear. Just until this blows over." Winnie looked from one to the other, understanding that the stakes had just been raised. Harold Dempsey clearly wasn't going to let her go without a fight, and her presence at the boarding house put Martha and the other residents at risk. "When would we leave?" she asked Bryce. "First light tomorrow," he replied. "Pack only what you need. We can send for the rest once you're settled." That night, Winnie lay awake long after the boarding house had gone quiet, her mind racing with all that had happened. In less than a week, her life had been completely upended again. She had fled one dangerous man only to nearly fall into the hands of another, and now she was preparing to leave for the isolated ranch of a man she barely knew but already trusted with her life. Was she being foolish? Perhaps. But as she finally drifted toward sleep, Winnie realized that for the first time since her father's death, she felt something like hope stirring in her heart. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with courage, and she would not be facing it alone. Dawn had barely broken when Winnie descended the stairs, her small valise packed with the few belongings she possessed. Martha was already in the kitchen, wrapping biscuits and bacon in cloth for their journey. "Bryce is out back with the wagon," she told Winnie. "I've packed enough provisions to last you a week or so." "Martha, I can't thank you enough for everything," Winnie began, but the older woman waved away her gratitude. "You've been a godsend around here," Martha insisted. "I'll miss your help, but your safety comes first." She hesitated, then added, "And I think this arrangement might be good for both you and my brother. He's been alone too long." Winnie felt her cheeks warm. "It's only a housekeeping position," she reminded Martha and herself. Martha's knowing smile suggested she believed otherwise. "Of course, dear. Now hurry along before the town wakes up." Outside, Bryce waited with a wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. His chestnut gelding was tethered to the back. He wore a pistol on his hip, something Winnie hadn't seen him carry before, and his expression was alert as he scanned the quiet street. "Ready?" he asked as he helped Winnie onto the wagon seat. She nodded, suddenly nervous about what lay ahead. As the wagon pulled away from the boarding house, Winnie resisted the urge to look back. Instead, she fixed her gaze on the road ahead and the mountains rising in the distance, determined to face this new chapter with the same courage that had brought her west in the first place. They traveled in companionable silence as the sun rose higher, the wagon following a winding road that gradually left the small town behind. The landscape opened up around them, rolling hills covered in sagebrush, stands of pine trees, and in the distance, snow-capped peaks that seemed to touch the sky. "It's about 10 miles to my place," Bryce explained as they paused to rest the horses near a small creek. "We should arrive before noon." Winnie stretched her legs, walking to the edge of the creek to splash cool water on her face. "It's so vast," she marveled, gazing at the landscape. "In Boston, you can barely see the horizon for all the buildings. Out here, it feels like you can see forever." "That's what I love about it," Bryce admitted, coming to stand beside her. "The space to breathe, to think, to be your own man without someone looking over your shoulder. Or woman," Winnie added with a smile. "Or woman," he agreed, returning her smile with one of his own that transformed his serious face. "Though I admit, it gets lonely sometimes, especially in winter when the snow makes travel difficult." "Is that why you're still unmarried?" Winnie asked before she could stop herself. "The isolation, I mean." If Bryce was surprised by her directness, he didn't show it. "Partly," he acknowledged. "Most women want more comforts than my small ranch can provide, and after the war." He paused, his gaze distant. I wasn't fit company for anyone for a long time. The memories. Winnie guessed, he nodded. Nightmares, mostly. Still have them sometimes. Martha says I was like a ghost those first few years, going through the motions of living without really being alive. What changed? Bryce considered the question. Time. Work. The land has a way of healing you if you let it. He glanced at her, something warm in his eyes. And sometimes, people come into your life unexpected and remind you there's more to living than just surviving. Before Winnie could respond to this veiled reference that might or might not include her, Bryce cleared his throat. We should get moving. Still a fair piece to go. As they continued their journey, the road narrowed to little more than a track winding through increasingly rugged terrain. Finally, they crested a hill and Bryce pulled the wagon to a halt. There it is, he said, pointing to the valley below. Xavier Ranch. Winnie followed his gaze and felt her breath catch. The small ranch was nestled in a picturesque valley with a creek winding through it. A modest cabin stood near a cluster of pine trees, smoke curling from its chimney. Nearby were a barn, a corral containing several horses, and what looked like a vegetable garden gone slightly wild. Beyond, she could see cattle grazing on the hillside. It's beautiful, she said sincerely. Pride shone in Bryce's eyes. It's not much compared to the big spreads, but every inch of it is paid for. Who's tending to things while you've been in town? Winnie asked as they descended toward the cabin. My neighbor, Joe Blackfoot. His people have lived in these mountains for generations. We help each other out. Bryce pointed to a thin spiral of smoke rising from beyond the next ridge. That's his place over there. As the wagon approached the cabin, a figure emerged from the barn, a Native American man of middle years with long black hair streaked with silver. He raised a hand in greeting. That's Joe now, Bryce said, returning the gesture. He's been keeping an eye on the stock for me. When they reached the yard, Bryce set the brake and jumped down, then came around to help Winnie descend. Joe approached, his dark eyes taking in Winnie's presence with interest but no surprise. Joe, this is Miss Winifred Calloway, Bryce introduced them. She'll be keeping house for me. Winnie, Joe Blackfoot. Welcome to Peaceful Valley, Miss Calloway, Joe said, his English perfect but spoken with a slight accent. I hope you find happiness here. Thank you, Mr. Blackfoot, Winnie replied, sensing a depth to his words beyond simple pleasantries. Everything all right while I was gone? Bryce asked. Joe nodded. The cow with the bad foot is healing well, and the mare dropped her foal 2 nights ago, a fine colt with 4 white socks. That's good news, Bryce said, clearly pleased. I'll come have a look once we get settled. After Joe departed, Bryce carried Winnie's valise to the cabin. It's not much, he warned as he pushed open the door, but it's solid. Winnie stepped inside and found herself in a surprisingly cozy main room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a rocking chair placed nearby. A sturdy table with 4 chairs stood in the center, and shelves lined another wall, filled with books more than she would have expected for a bachelor's cabin. You read a lot, she observed, running her finger along the spines. Dickens, Twain, Shakespeare, and to her surprise, Jane Austen. Bryce looked slightly embarrassed. Winter nights are long out here. Books are good company. A doorway led to a smaller room containing a bed with a handmade quilt, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a basin and pitcher. Sunlight streamed through a window overlooking the creek. This will be your room, Bryce told her. I'll be sleeping in the barn until I can build that separate cabin I mentioned. You don't need to do that, Winnie protested. I can take the barn. Bryce shook his head firmly. No woman is sleeping in my barn while I take the bed. That's final. His tone brooked no argument. After showing her where everything was kept, Bryce excused himself to check on his animals, leaving Winnie to settle in. She unpacked her few belongings, then explored the cabin more thoroughly. Despite its modest size, it was well built and surprisingly comfortable, though in need of a woman's touch. Dust had accumulated on the shelves, and the windows could use a good washing. Determined to earn her keep from the start, Winnie rolled up her sleeves and set to work. She found cleaning supplies in a small pantry and began with the windows, letting in more of the bright autumn sunshine. By the time Bryce returned 2 hours later, she had swept the floors, dusted every surface, and was in the process of organizing the kitchen. "You didn't have to start working right away," he said, looking impressed at the transformation. "You must be tired from the journey." "I wanted to," Winnie assured him. "It feels good to be useful." Bryce disappeared back outside and returned with a freshly killed rabbit. "Thought we might have this for supper. There are potatoes and onions in the root cellar if they haven't all sprouted." Together, they prepared the evening meal, moving around the small kitchen with surprising ease, as if they had done this together many times before. As Winnie made a simple stew, she found herself relaxing for the first time in days. The ranch's isolation, which had initially concerned her, now felt like a protective shield from the troubles they'd left behind in town. That evening they ate at the table by lamplight, with the door open to catch the cool evening breeze. Crickets chirped outside, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "Will you tell me about Boston?" Bryce asked as they finished their meal. "I've never been east of the Mississippi." Winnie described the bustling city, its cobblestone streets and grand buildings, the public garden in spring when the tulips bloomed, the harbor filled with ships from around the world. She told him about concerts at the music hall and lectures at the Athenaeum, about ice skating on the frozen common in winter. "It sounds like another world," Bryce remarked. "It is," Winnie agreed. "Sometimes I can hardly believe I lived there my whole life until now." She paused, studying his face in the lamplight. "Do you ever miss Missouri?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "Mostly I miss the people, my parents, friends who didn't make it back from the war, but this is home now. I don't think I could ever go back to living with neighbors right on top of me." "Even if it means being alone?" Winnie asked softly. Bryce met her gaze directly. "I'm not alone now, am I?" The simple statement hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. After a moment, Bryce cleared his throat and stood. "I should see to the horses before turning in. Make yourself comfortable. Everything here is at your disposal." After he'd gone, Winnie washed the dishes and prepared for bed. The cabin creaked and settled around her as she blew out the lamp. Unfamiliar sounds that might have been frightening if she hadn't felt so inexplicably safe. As she drifted toward sleep, she realized that despite all the uncertainty in her life, this small cabin already felt more like home than Victor Elliott's grand house in Boston ever had. Days fell into a comfortable routine at Xavier Ranch. Winnie rose early to prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings tending to the cabin and the garden, which she had begun to reclaim from the weeds that threatened to overtake it. In the afternoons, she often walked along the creek, gathering wild berries or simply enjoying the peaceful surroundings. Bryce worked from dawn to dusk, mending fences, caring for the animals, and preparing for the coming winter. Sometimes Joe Blackfoot joined him, and the two men would work side by side with the easy camaraderie of long friendship. In the evenings, Bryce and Winnie shared meals and conversation, gradually revealing more of themselves to each other. A week passed, then two, with no sign of trouble from town. Winnie began to hope that perhaps Harold Dempsey had given up his pursuit, though Bryce remained vigilant, never going far from the cabin without his rifle. One evening, As they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Bryce broached a subject they had both been avoiding. "I need to go into town tomorrow," he said. "We're running low on supplies and I want to check with Martha, make sure everything's all right." Winnie nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course. You've been away from your affairs too long because of me." "No," Bryce corrected gently. "Not because of you. Because of Harold Dempsey and his kind. There's a difference." "Still, you should go," Winnie said. "I'll be fine here for a day." Bryce studied her for a moment. "I'd rather you weren't alone. Joe's gone to Carson City for the week, and even though Dempsey likely has no idea where you are—" "You're still worried," Winnie finished for him. "Call it soldier's instinct," Bryce said. "I don't like leaving anything to chance." "Then I'll come with you," Winnie decided. "I can visit with Martha while you attend to your business." Bryce shook his head firmly. "That's too risky. Dempsey or his men could be watching the boarding house." "Then what do you suggest?" Winnie asked, a hint of frustration creeping into her voice. "I can't hide forever, Bryce. Sooner or later I need to establish a life beyond this ranch, find proper employment. I can't impose on your generosity indefinitely." "You're not imposing," Bryce insisted. "Having you here—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The cabin hasn't felt this much like a home since I built it." The admission hung between them, weighted with unspoken feelings. Winnie's heart beat faster as she met his gaze in the fading light. "I feel the same way," she admitted softly. "But that doesn't change the reality of our situation. I came west to find independence, not to trade one form of dependency for another." Bryce looked as though she had struck him. "Is that how you see this?" "As dependency?" Winnie immediately regretted her choice of words. "No, that's not what I meant. You've been nothing but kind and honorable, but—" She struggled to articulate her complicated feelings. "I need to know I can stand on my own 2 feet. That I have choices beyond relying on someone else's protection." Understanding dawned in Bryce's eyes. "You're right, and I'm sorry if I've made you feel otherwise." He thought for a moment. "What if we compromise? I'll go to town alone tomorrow, but when I return, we'll discuss ways for you to establish yourself more independently. Perhaps there are opportunities in Genoa that would suit your skills." Relief washed over Winnie. "Thank you for understanding." Bryce's expression softened. "I want you to be happy, Winnie, however that happens." The next morning, Winnie stood in the yard, watching as Bryce saddled his horse. He had dressed more carefully than usual, wearing a clean shirt and his best hat, and had trimmed his beard neatly. "I should be back by nightfall," he told her, checking his pistol before sliding it into its holster. "Keep the doors locked, and if anyone approaches that isn't me, use this." He handed her a small derringer. "Do you know how to use it?" "My father taught me after the war when Boston wasn't as safe as it once was," Winnie assured him, tucking the weapon into her apron pocket. "Though I've never had cause to fire at anything but targets. Let's hope it stays that way." Bryce mounted his horse, looking down at her with concern still evident in his eyes. "I don't like leaving you alone." "I'll be fine," Winnie promised. "Just be careful in town. Harold Dempsey might hold a grudge against you as much as me." "I can handle Harold Dempsey," Bryce said confidently. As he rode away, Winnie felt an unexpected pang of loneliness. In such a short time, she had grown accustomed to Bryce's steady presence, to their easy conversations and companionable silences. The cabin, which had begun to feel like home, suddenly seemed emptier without him. To distract herself, she threw herself into chores, baking bread, preserving the last of the summer berries, and attacking the remaining weeds in the garden with renewed vigor. By midday, she had worked up a proper sweat and decided to treat herself to a brief respite by the creek. The water ran clear and cold over smooth stones, creating a soothing melody that soon lulled Winnie into a peaceful reverie. She was so absorbed in her thoughts, most of which centered on a certain dark-haired cowboy, that she didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until they were nearly upon her. Startled, she rose quickly, her hand automatically going to the derringer in her pocket. Relief washed over her as she recognized Joe Blackfoot riding toward her, leading a pack-horse laden with supplies. "Mr. Blackfoot," she called in greeting. "I thought you were in Carson City for the week." Joe dismounted, his expression serious. "Finished my business early. Glad I did." He glanced around. "Where is Xavier?" "He went to town for supplies," Winnie explained. "He should be back by nightfall." Concern deepened the lines around Joe's eyes. "Then we should get you back to the cabin." "Something doesn't feel right." "What do you mean?" Winnie asked, her earlier unease returning tenfold. Joe hesitated, as if debating how much to tell her. "I passed 3 riders on the ridge above the valley. They were watching the cabin. When they saw me, they moved on, but I don't think they went far." Fear tightened Winnie's chest. "Harold Dempsey's men, maybe," Joe acknowledged. "Or just drifters. Either way, better to be safe." Together, they returned to the cabin, where Joe insisted on checking the surrounding area while Winnie secured the doors and windows. When he returned, his expression was grim. "They're still up there," he reported. 3 men well armed. They're waiting for something. Or someone." "Me," Winnie whispered, her mouth suddenly dry. "Harold Dempsey must have discovered where I am." Joe nodded. "Seems likely. I will stay until Xavier returns." Grateful for his presence, Winnie insisted Joe join her for a meal. As they ate, she asked about his history with Bryce, eager for any distraction from the threat lurking on the ridge. "We met just after he came west," Joe explained. "My people, the Washoe, have lived in these mountains for countless generations. When settlers began claiming land, many conflicts arose. But Xavier was different. He came alone, asked permission to build here, offered fair trade for the land." "That sounds like Bryce," Winnie observed with a smile. "He is a good man," Joe agreed. "After he helped my son when he was injured in a fall, we became friends. My wife says he carries many ghosts, but his heart is strong." "The war," Winnie said softly. "He mentioned he still has nightmares." Joe nodded. "The past leaves its mark on all of us. But the future can be different if we are brave enough to reach for it." Something in his tone made Winnie wonder if he was speaking of more than just Bryce's wartime experiences. Before she could ask, Joe tensed, his head turning toward the window. "Riders coming," he said, reaching for his rifle. "Stay away from the windows." Winnie's heart hammered against her ribs as she heard the approaching hoofbeats. "Is it Bryce?" Joe shook his head. "Too many horses." He moved to the door, rifle ready. "If anything happens to me, run for the creek and follow it upstream. My village is 3 miles that way." "I'm not leaving you," Winnie protested, drawing the derringer from her pocket. Joe gave her an approving nod. "Then we stand together." The riders stopped in the yard and a voice called out, "Miss Calloway, we know you're in there. Mr. Dempsey wants a word with you." Winnie and Joe exchanged a glance. Neither responded. "Now, there's no need for this to get ugly," the voice continued. "Mr. Dempsey is a reasonable man. He just wants what's rightfully his. Come on out and no one needs to get hurt." Still, they remained silent. Winnie's palm was sweating around the small pistol as she took up position beside the window, careful to stay out of sight. "Have it your way," the voice called after another moment. "Boys, check the barn. She might be hiding there." Through a gap in the curtains, Winnie could see 3 men dismounting, rough-looking characters with the hard eyes of men who did violence for pay. 2 headed for the barn, while the 3rd remained with the horses, scanning the cabin for any sign of movement. "When Xavier returns, they will ambush him," Joe whispered. "We must warn him." "How?" Winnie asked desperately. We're trapped in here. Joe considered the problem. There is a way through the root cellar. My ancestors used such passages to escape enemies. Xavier knows of it. We dug it together when he built this place. Hope surged within Winnie. Show me. Joe led her to the pantry, where he moved aside several crates to reveal a trapdoor in the floor. This leads to a tunnel that comes out near the creek, hidden by brush. If you go now, you might intercept Xavier before he reaches the valley. What about you? Winnie asked. I will stay, keep them occupied, Joe said firmly. They do not know how many are inside. If they think both of us are here, it will give you more time. Winnie knew he was right, but the thought of leaving him alone to face 3 armed men filled her with dread. Be careful, she pleaded. Joe smiled. Always, now go. The tunnel was narrow and dark, forcing Winnie to crouch as she made her way forward, one hand on the earthen wall to guide her. The passage seemed to go on forever, though it could only have been 100 yards at most. Finally, she felt fresh air on her face and emerged into the fading daylight, concealed from view by a thick growth of willow trees along the creek bank. Orienting herself, Winnie realized the tunnel had brought her out downstream from the cabin, closer to the trail that led to town. She began making her way carefully through the underbrush, keeping the creek to her left as she moved toward the main road. If she could intercept Bryce before he entered the valley, there might still be time to avoid a confrontation. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the landscape, Winnie's worry increased. Bryce should have been back by now. Had something happened to him in town? Had Dempsey's men caught him unaware? The sound of a horse approaching sent her ducking behind a boulder. Peering cautiously around it, she nearly collapsed with relief at the sight of Bryce riding toward her, his saddlebags full of supplies. Without thinking, she rushed out onto the trail. Bryce, she called. He reined his horse to a halt, surprise and alarm crossing his face. Winnie. What are you doing out here? His hand immediately went to his pistol as his eyes scanned the surrounding area for danger. Quickly, Winnie explained about Joe's return and the men watching the cabin. They're waiting for you, she finished breathlessly. Joe stayed behind to make them think we're both still there. Bryce's expression darkened. Dempsey's not letting this go, then. He extended his hand. Come on, we need to get back to help Joe. Winnie took his hand and let him pull her up behind him on the horse. She wrapped her arms around his waist, clinging tightly as the horse broke into a gallop. We can't just ride straight in, she pointed out as they approached the valley. They'll see us coming. I know a back way, Bryce assured her. Hold on tight. He guided the horse off the main trail and into a dense stand of pine trees. The path, barely visible to Winnie's eyes, wound steeply upward until they reached a ridge overlooking the cabin. From this vantage point, they could see Dempsey's men, one still guarding the horses, the other 2 now positioned at the front and back of the cabin. They've got Joe pinned down, Bryce observed grimly. But they haven't made a move to enter. They're still waiting for us. What do we do? Winnie asked. Bryce studied the situation, his mind clearly working through their options. I need to get close enough to create a distraction. When I do, Joe will know to make his move. He turned to look at Winnie. You should stay here out of sight. No, Winnie said firmly. I'm coming with you. I can shoot if I have to. She patted the derringer in her pocket. Bryce looked as though he might argue, then nodded. Stay close and do exactly as I say. They left the horse tethered out of sight and made their way down the ridge on foot, using the lengthening shadows for cover. As they neared the edge of the clearing where the cabin stood, Bryce motioned for Winnie to wait while he crept forward to get a better view of the situation. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, followed by the sound of breaking glass. One of Dempsey's men had fired into the cabin window. Come on out and Jun, the man shouted. We know you're alone in there, The girl's gone and Xavier's not coming back. Winnie's blood ran cold. Not coming back. What does he mean? Bryce's expression was grim. I had a run-in with Dempsey in town. Nothing serious, but he made threats. These men must think they've dealt with me already. Another shot pierced the growing dusk, followed by the sound of splintering wood. We're done waiting. The same voice called. We're coming in to get you, then we're burning this place to the ground. I have to move now, Bryce whispered. When you hear my shot, run for the barn. There's a rifle hidden in the hay loft, left side. Before Winnie could respond, Bryce was moving, circling wide to approach the man guarding the horses. She watched, heart in her throat as he crept closer, staying low in the tall grass. When he was within a few yards, Bryce suddenly stood and fired a single shot into the air. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The horses reared and bucked, breaking free from their tethers. The guard shouted in alarm, drawing the attention of his companions. In the same moment, the cabin door burst open and Joe Blackfoot emerged, rifle blazing. Winnie seized the opportunity to dash for the barn. Inside, she scrambled up the ladder to the hayloft, frantically searching where Bryce had indicated. Her fingers closed around the cool metal of a Winchester rifle just as a shadow fell across the barn door. One of Dempsey's men had followed her. "Come out, little lady," he called, his voice menacing as he stepped into the barn. "Mr. Dempsey's paid good money for you, and I aim to collect." Winnie raised the rifle, her hand steadier than she would have expected. "Stay back," she warned, her voice ringing clear in the enclosed space. The man looked up, spotting her in the loft. He grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Now, don't be foolish. A little thing like you can't handle a weapon like that." "My brother was with the 103rd Ohio," Winnie replied, steeling herself. "He taught me to shoot before he marched to Georgia." "I can hit a squirrel at 50 yards. You're a much bigger target." The man hesitated, clearly reassessing the situation. His hand hovered near his pistol. "I wouldn't," Winnie advised. "Even if you're faster than me, the noise will bring my friends. You'll never make it out of this barn alive." For a tense moment, the man seemed to be weighing his options. Then, abruptly, he turned and bolted from the barn. Winnie waited until she was sure he was gone before descending, the rifle still clutched in her hands. Outside, chaos had erupted. One of Dempsey's men lay motionless on the ground. The other two were retreating, firing wildly as they backed toward the trees where their spooked horses had fled. Bryce and Joe were advancing steadily, using the cover of the cabin and woodpile. Winnie raised the rifle to her shoulder, aiming at the ground near the retreating men's feet. She squeezed the trigger, the recoil surprising her despite her preparation. The shot kicked up dirt inches from one man's boot, causing him to stumble and fall. "That's enough," Bryce shouted. "Drop your weapons or the next shot won't miss." The fallen man glanced at his companion, then at Bryce's unwavering rifle. Slowly, he raised his hands. "Don't shoot. We're just doing what we were paid for." "Which is what exactly?" Bryce demanded, keeping his rifle trained on them as Joe moved to collect their discarded weapons. "Dempsey wants the girl," the man admitted. "Said to bring her back no matter what. Said you'd be taken care of in town, but obviously that didn't happen." "What do you mean, taken care of?" Winnie asked, joining them with her rifle still at the ready. The man shrugged. "Don't know details. Just heard Dempsey telling someone he'd arranged for Xavier to have an accident in town. That's why we weren't expecting you," he added, looking at Bryce. "Harold tried," Bryce confirmed grimly. "Had two men waiting for me behind the livery. They weren't expecting me to be armed." He glanced at the body lying in the yard. "Is he dead?" Joe shook his head. "Wounded. He will live, unfortunately." Relief washed over Winnie. She had seen enough death in her life without adding to the toll today. "What now?" she asked, looking from Bryce to Joe. "Now," Bryce said, his expression hardening, "we end this, once and for all." The confrontation at the ranch marked a turning point in Winnie's relationship with Bryce Xavier. As they bound the hired guns and tended to the wounded man, a new understanding seemed to form between them, unspoken but profound. They had faced danger together and emerged stronger for it. Joe Blackfoot agreed to escort the three men to the sheriff in Carson City, where they would face charges of trespassing and attempted murder. Dempsey's involvement would be more difficult to prove, but at least the immediate threat had been neutralized. That night, after Joe had departed with his prisoners, Winnie and Bryce sat before the fire, the events of the day weighing heavily on both their minds. "This won't end until Harold Dempsey is held accountable," Winnie said quietly. "He'll just send more men or come himself." Bryce nodded, his expression grim. "I know, but these men will talk to save themselves. It might be enough to finally bring Dempsey's crimes to light." "And if it isn't?" Winnie asked. Bryce's eyes met hers, determination evident in their depths. "Then we'll find another way." "I won't let him hurt you, Winnie, or anyone else." Winnie studied his face in the firelight, seeing the lines of weariness etched there. "You were nearly killed today because of me. I can't bear the thought of being responsible for—" "Stop," Bryce interrupted gently. "None of this is your fault. The responsibility lies with Dempsey and men like him who believe they can take whatever they want without consequence." He reached across the space between them, his hand covering hers. "Besides, I made my choice the moment I saw you step off that train. I'd make the same choice again, knowing everything that's happened since." The warmth of his touch sent a flutter through Winnie's chest. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why risk so much for a stranger?" Bryce's gaze never wavered. "Because you're not a stranger anymore, Winnie. You're the bravest woman I've ever known. And because—" he hesitated, as if gathering his courage. "Because I think I've been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning and possibility. Winnie's heart pounded as she turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining. "I feel the same way," she admitted softly. "When I left Boston, I was running away from something terrible. I never imagined I might be running toward something wonderful." Bryce's expression softened, hope kindling in his eyes. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward. Winnie met him halfway, her eyes closing as their lips touched in a gentle, questioning kiss. It lasted only a moment, but when they parted, something fundamental had shifted between them. "I should go," Bryce said reluctantly, rising from his chair. "It's late and it's been a long day." Winnie stood as well, suddenly shy. "You don't have to sleep in the barn tonight," she offered. "After everything that's happened, I'd feel safer with you here. You could use that bedroll by the fire." Relief and something more complex crossed Bryce's features. "If you're sure." "I'm sure," Winnie confirmed. "Good night, Bryce." "Good night, Winnie," he replied softly. In her small bedroom, Winnie pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling the gentle pressure of Bryce's kiss. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt truly certain that she had made the right decision in coming west. Whatever dangers still lay ahead with Harold Dempsey, she would face them with Bryce at her side. The next morning, they were awakened by the sound of approaching riders. Bryce was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, while Winnie peered cautiously through the window. "It's Sheriff Miller from Genoa," she reported with relief. "And Martha's with him." They opened the door to find the sheriff, Martha, and two deputies dismounting in the yard. Martha rushed forward to embrace Winnie. "Thank God you're safe," she exclaimed. "When Bryce didn't return to town last night, I feared the worst." Sheriff Miller, a weathered man with a silver mustache and tired eyes, approached more slowly. "Mr. Xavier," he greeted Bryce with a nod. "Miss Calloway, looks like you had some excitement here." He gestured to the blood-stained ground where the wounded gunman had lain. "You could say that," Bryce agreed, lowering his rifle. "Harold Dempsey sent men to abduct Miss Calloway. One was wounded in the exchange. Joe Blackfoot is taking all three to the Carson City Sheriff as we speak." The sheriff frowned. "That's my jurisdiction they're crossing. I should have been notified first." "With all due respect, Sheriff," Bryce replied evenly, "your jurisdiction is where Harold Dempsey holds considerable influence. We weren't confident justice would be served in Genoa." Miller's face reddened slightly. "Now see here, Xavier. I uphold the law equally for everyone, regardless of their standing in the community." "Is that so?" Bryce challenged. "Then why haven't you investigated the suspicious deaths of Harold Dempsey's previous mail-order brides?" "3 women, Sheriff. 3 women who met violent ends under his roof." "Those were accidents," Miller protested, though something flickered in his eyes that suggested uncertainty. "Were they?" Martha interjected. "Come now, Benjamin, you've known me since we were children." "Would I lie about something so serious? I saw those women, saw their injuries. No accident causes bruises shaped like handprints." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Hearsay isn't evidence, Martha. You know that." "Then perhaps this is," Winnie said, disappearing into the cabin and returning with Sarah Collins's diary, which Bryce had brought from town. Sarah Collins documented every beating, every threat. She was planning to flee when she died, a death Harold Dempsey claimed was suicide. Miller took the diary reluctantly. "I'll look into it," he promised. "But in the meantime, I need statements from both of you about what happened here yesterday." While Bryce and Winnie recounted the attack, Martha prepared coffee and breakfast for everyone. The domesticity of the scene, Martha bustling about the kitchen, the men talking seriously at the table, struck Winnie as remarkably normal despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Well," the sheriff said when they had finished their accounts, "I'll ride to Carson City and speak with these men myself. If their stories match yours, we may finally have enough to bring charges against Dempsey." He looked troubled. "I hope you understand a man in my position can't act without evidence, especially against someone as influential as Harold Dempsey." "We understand," Winnie assured him. "All we ask is that you look at the evidence honestly." As the sheriff and his deputies prepared to leave, Martha announced she would be staying. "Winnie shouldn't be alone out here, not with Dempsey still at large, and someone needs to keep an eye on my brother." She winked at Winnie, making her blush. After the lawman had gone, Martha turned to Bryce and Winnie with a knowing smile. "So," she said, "when were you two planning to tell me about the change in your relationship?" Winnie's blush deepened. "Martha, oh, don't bother denying it," Martha interrupted with a laugh. "It's written all over both your faces, and about time, too." Bryce cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "It's recent." "Well, I couldn't be happier," Martha declared. "But as your sister, Bryce Xavier, I feel obligated to point out that your current living arrangement might raise eyebrows if it continues much longer." "Martha," Bryce protested. "I'm just saying," Martha continued undeterred, "that proper introductions should be made, intentions stated clearly, and appropriate steps taken." Winnie looked from brother to sister, amusement bubbling up despite the seriousness of their situation. "Are you suggesting Bryce make an honest woman of me, Martha?" "Eventually," Martha agreed with a straight face. "Though I understand there are more pressing matters at the moment, like ensuring neither of you ends up dead at Harold Dempsey's hands." The stark reminder sobered them all. Bryce reached for Winnie's hand, squeezing it gently. "One step at a time," he said quietly. "First, we deal with Dempsey, then—" His eyes met Winnie's, full of promise. Then we can discuss the future. 3 days passed without word from Sheriff Miller. Bryce grew increasingly restless, splitting firewood and mending fences with unusual intensity, while Martha and Winnie kept the cabin running smoothly. Despite the underlying tension of waiting for news, there was a comfortable domesticity to their days that Winnie found herself treasuring. On the 4th day, as autumn painted the surrounding hills in vibrant golds and reds, Joe Blackfoot appeared at the ranch, his expression grave. "The men we captured have been released," he reported. Dempsey's lawyer arrived in Carson City with documents claiming they were working under his legal authority to retrieve his property, meaning you, Miss Calloway. "That's absurd," Bryce growled. "Winnie isn't property. She never signed any contract with Dempsey." "Nevertheless, they're free," Joe continued. "And Dempsey himself is missing. He hasn't been seen in Genoa for 2 days." A chill ran down Winnie's spine. "You think he's coming here, it seems likely," Joe acknowledged, "which is why I brought help." He gestured toward the ridge, where Winnie could now see several mounted figures waiting. "My brothers will help us stand against him." Bryce clasped Joe's shoulder gratefully. "I can't ask your people to risk themselves in our quarrel." "You didn't ask," Joe pointed out. "And it is not only your quarrel. Dempsey has long been an enemy to my people, taking land that was promised to us, polluting the streams with his mining operations. It is time he answered for his many crimes." As the day wore on, Joe's relatives, 5 strong men armed with rifles and bows, took up positions around the ranch. Martha prepared a stew large enough to feed everyone, and as night fell, they gathered around a fire in the yard, sharing the meal and stories while keeping watchful eyes on the surrounding darkness. Winnie sat beside Bryce, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I never imagined my coming to Nevada would lead to all this," she said quietly. "Nor did I," Bryce admitted, "but I can't find it in me to regret a moment of it." His eyes met hers, warm in the firelight. "Except perhaps that you've been put in danger." "I was in danger long before I met you," Winnie reminded him. "At least now I'm not facing it alone." Bryce's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "You'll never have to face anything alone again if I have any say in the matter." The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet certainty, filled Winnie's heart to bursting. Whatever the future held, danger from Harold Dempsey, uncertainty about her place in this wild territory, she knew with sudden clarity that she wanted to face it with Bryce Xavier at her side. The attack came just before dawn, when the eastern sky had begun to lighten, but true daylight was still a promise rather than a reality. The first sign was a shot fired at one of Joe's men keeping watch near the corral, the bullet missing him by inches as he dove for cover. "They're here," he called in warning, his voice cutting through the pre-dawn stillness. Bryce was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Winnie, Martha, get inside and stay low," he ordered, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. Winnie hesitated, reluctant to leave his side, but Martha tugged her toward the cabin. "He needs to focus on the fight, not on protecting us," the older woman said sensibly. From the cabin window, Winnie could see shadows moving at the edge of the clearing, at least 6 men, maybe more, using the trees for cover as they worked their way closer to the ranch buildings. Joe and his kinsmen had taken defensive positions, returning fire whenever a target presented itself. Bryce was crouched behind the woodpile, his rifle steady as he scanned for threats. Even in the midst of danger, Winnie couldn't help admiring his composure, the way he moved with the practiced precision of a man who had faced battle before. A figure separated from the attackers, moving toward the open space between the trees and the cabin. Harold Dempsey's voice rang out, surprisingly clear in the morning air. "Xavier, I know you can hear me. Send out the woman, and this ends now." "She's rightfully mine. I paid for her passage," answered her advertisement. "The law's on my side." "The law doesn't recognize ownership of human beings anymore, Dempsey," Bryce called back. "Not since the war." "This isn't about ownership," Dempsey insisted, though his tone suggested otherwise. "It's about a contract. She agreed to be my bride." "I never signed anything," Winnie shouted from the window, unable to remain silent. "And even if I had, no contract gives a man the right to beat a woman like you did Anna Mitchell and Sarah Collins." Dempsey's voice hardened. "You should have kept your mouth shut, girl. Now I'm going to burn this place to the ground with all of you inside it." A flaming arrow arced through the dawn light, landing on the barn roof. Within moments, others followed, some hitting the ground harmlessly, others finding their targets in the wooden structures. Smoke began to rise from the barn as the dry timber caught fire. "We need to save the animals," Winnie cried, moving toward the door. Martha grabbed her arm. "It's too dangerous." But Winnie couldn't bear the thought of the horses trapped inside as the flames spread. Before Martha could stop her, she darted out the back door of the cabin and ran toward the barn, keeping low. Bryce saw her and cursed, providing covering fire as she sprinted across the open space. A bullet kicked up dirt at her feet, but she reached the barn safely, throwing open the wide doors. Inside, the horses were whinnying in terror as smoke filled the air. Winnie moved quickly from stall to stall, releasing the panicked animals and guiding them toward the open doors. As the last horse bolted to freedom, she turned to follow, only to find Harold Dempsey standing in the doorway, a pistol aimed at her heart. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble, Miss Calloway," he said conversationally, as if they were meeting at a social gathering rather than in a burning barn. Winnie backed away, searching frantically for an escape route. The smoke was thickening, making it hard to breathe. "Mr. Dempsey, the barn is on fire. We need to get out." "Oh, I'll be leaving," Dempsey assured her. "But I think perhaps this is a fitting end for a woman who's brought me nothing but aggravation." He glanced up at the burning rafters. "They'll find your body in the ashes, a tragic accident. Xavier will blame himself for failing to protect you. He might even come after me, which would give me the excuse I need to put a bullet in him legally." Horror washed over Winnie as she realized his intention. Dempsey meant to leave her here to burn alive. She backed away further, her mind racing for a solution. The Derringer was in her pocket, but at this distance, Dempsey's larger pistol gave him the advantage. A beam crashed down behind her, sending sparks flying. The heat was becoming unbearable, the smoke making her eyes water and her lungs burn. She had only moments left before the entire structure would be engulfed. "Why?" she asked, buying time. "Why go to all this trouble over a mail-order bride? You could have found another." Something dark passed over Dempsey's face. "Because no one defies me," he snarled. "Not in my town, not on my territory. Xavier needs to learn his place, and so do you." "Harold," Bryce's voice cut through the crackling of the flames. He stood at the side entrance to the barn, his rifle aimed at Dempsey's chest. "Step away from her." Dempsey's reaction was instantaneous. He grabbed Winnie, pulling her in front of him as a shield, his pistol pressed to her temple. "Drop the rifle, Xavier, or I'll put a bullet in her brain right now." For a heart-stopping moment, Winnie thought Bryce might refuse, might try to make the shot despite the risk to her. Instead, he slowly lowered his weapon to the ground. "Let her go, Harold," he said evenly. "Your quarrel is with me, not her." "My quarrel is with anyone who stands in my way," Dempsey retorted. "Now back up. We're all going to leave this barn together, nice and slow." The three of them moved carefully toward the main doors, Dempsey keeping Winnie firmly in front of him as protection against Joe and the others who might be waiting outside. The smoke was so thick now that Winnie could barely see, her lungs screaming for fresh air. As they emerged into the daylight, Winnie blinked, temporarily blinded by the contrast. She could hear shouts Joe's men and Dempsey's circling each other like wolves, neither side willing to fire for fear of hitting their own people. "Tell your Indian friends to back off, Xavier," Dempsey ordered. "Or the girl dies right here." Bryce raised his hands, signaling to Joe and the others to hold their fire. "You're surrounded, Harold. There's nowhere to go." "There's always somewhere to go for a man with money," Dempsey countered. "My horse is just beyond those trees. The girl comes with me as insurance until I'm clear of this valley. After that, maybe I'll let her live, maybe not." He smiled coldly. "Depends on how accommodating she is." Rage flashed across Bryce's features, quickly controlled. "And if I refuse, then she dies now," Dempsey said simply. "Your choice." While the men were focused on each other, Winnie made her own choice. Her hand slipped into her pocket, fingers closing around the small derringer Bryce had given her. The gun was pressed so tightly to her temple that Dempsey couldn't see what she was doing. "Wait," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'll go with you voluntarily, Mr. Dempsey. No need for force." Surprise flickered in Dempsey's eyes, followed by suspicion. "Why the sudden change of heart?" "Because I'd rather live," Winnie replied truthfully. "And clearly, Mr. Xavier can't protect me as he claimed." She allowed disappointment to color her tone, hoping Dempsey would believe her apparent surrender. The strategy worked. Dempsey's grip relaxed slightly as his confidence grew. "Smart girl. Maybe you'll be worth the trouble after all." In that moment of relaxed vigilance, Winnie made her move. She twisted in Dempsey's grasp, bringing the derringer up between them. Before he could react, she fired. At such close range, even the small pistol was devastatingly effective. Harold Dempsey stumbled backward, a look of utter astonishment on his face as he stared at the growing red stain on his chest. His own pistol slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers. "You!" he gasped, disbelief written across his features. Then he crumpled to the ground, his eyes staring sightlessly at the morning sky. For a moment, everyone stood frozen in shock. Then Bryce was at Winnie's side, gently taking the derringer from her trembling hand and pulling her against his chest. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently, his arms encircling her protectively. Winnie nodded, though in truth she wasn't sure. She had just taken a man's life, a violent, dangerous man who would have killed her without hesitation, but a human being nonetheless. The weight of that act settled over her like a heavy cloak. "His men are running," Joe called, approaching cautiously. "Without Dempsey to lead them, they have no stomach for this fight." The barn was fully engulfed in flames now, the heat intense even from where they stood. In the distance, Winnie could see the horses she had freed galloping across the meadow, their manes flying in the wind like banners of freedom. "We need to save what we can," Bryce said, looking at the cabin, which had thus far been spared from the fire. "Joe, can your men help us form a bucket line from the creek?" As the group mobilized to fight the fire, Winnie found herself guided to a fallen log some distance away, Martha's arm around her shoulders. "You did what you had to do," the older woman said gently. "That man would have killed you and Bryce and anyone else who stood in his way." "I know," Winnie acknowledged, "but I never thought I'd be capable of taking a life." "None of us knows what we're capable of until we're tested," Martha replied. "The important thing is that you're alive, and so is my brother. Dempsey can't hurt anyone else now." As the day progressed, the barn burned to the ground despite their efforts, but they managed to save the cabin and the smaller outbuildings. Dempsey's body was wrapped in a blanket and loaded onto a horse to be taken to town. His men had disappeared completely, likely heading back to Genoa to spread the news of their employer's demise. Sheriff Miller arrived by mid-afternoon, accompanied by several deputies and, surprisingly, Doc Sullivan. They had heard the gunfire from town and had ridden out to investigate. After taking statements from everyone involved and examining Sarah Collins's diary, the sheriff declared the shooting a clear case of self-defense. "Dempsey came onto your property armed and with hostile intent," he told Bryce and Winnie. "You had every right to defend yourselves." "What will happen now?" Winnie asked. "With Dempsey gone, I mean." Doc Sullivan, a kindly man with spectacles and a thoughtful manner, answered. "Harold Dempsey may have been influential, but he wasn't well liked. His widow is already making arrangements to sell their properties and return to San Francisco permanently. And the town will go on," Sheriff Miller added. "Genoa was here before Harold Dempsey, and it'll be here long after he's forgotten." That evening, after everyone had gone and the ranch had fallen quiet once more, Winnie sat on the porch steps, watching as the last light faded from the sky. The day's events kept replaying in her mind: the terror in the burning barn, Dempsey's cold eyes as he threatened her life, the shocking recoil of the Derringer as she pulled the trigger. Bryce joined her, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly. "I'm not sure they're worth that much," Winnie replied with a small smile. "Just trying to make sense of everything that's happened since I stepped off that train." "Any regrets?" Bryce asked, something vulnerable in his tone. Winnie considered the question seriously. "About coming west? No." "About what happened today? Yes and no. I regret that a man died, but I don't regret protecting us." She turned to look at him directly. "What about you? Do you regret intervening that day at the station?" Bryce's eyes, warm in the gathering twilight, met hers without hesitation. "Not for a single moment," he assured her. "Though I do regret that you've been through so much danger because of it." "Not because of it," Winnie corrected. "Because of Harold Dempsey's cruelty and obsession with control. None of that is your responsibility." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch: the distant lowing of cattle, the chirping of crickets, the soft hooting of an owl beginning its evening hunt. Finally, Bryce spoke, his voice hesitant. "Martha pointed out something I've been too cowardly to address directly: our living arrangement." Winnie felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Yes, she mentioned it to me as well, very directly." "That's Martha," Bryce said with a low chuckle. "Never one to mince words." He shifted to face her more fully. "The thing is, Winnie, I don't want you to feel pressured. You came west seeking independence, not another situation where your choices are limited." "Bryce Xavier," Winnie said, summoning her courage, "are you trying to propose to me or talk me out of accepting?" Surprise flickered across his face, followed by a slow smile that transformed his features. "I suppose I'm making a mess of both," he admitted. "What I'm trying to say is that I love you, Winifred Calloway. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you step off that train with those bruises, looking both terrified and determined. And every day since has only deepened those feelings." Winnie's heart soared at his words. "I love you too," she said simply. "I wasn't looking for love when I came west. I was just trying to survive. But you showed me that life can be more than mere survival. It can be beautiful and meaningful, even in the midst of danger and uncertainty." Bryce took her hands in his expression solemn yet hopeful. "Then, if you're sure, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because convention demands it or because you need protection, but because we choose each other freely and completely." "Yes," Winnie answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Bryce Xavier." He leaned forward, capturing her lips in a kiss that expressed all the emotion words couldn't contain. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Winnie rested her forehead against his. "Martha will be insufferably pleased with herself," she murmured, making Bryce laugh. "She'll say she knew all along," he agreed. "And the truth is, she probably did. Martha's always been able to see what's in my heart better than I can myself." As darkness settled fully over the ranch, they remained on the porch, talking of the future, rebuilding the barn, expanding the herd, perhaps adding a schoolroom to the cabin where Winnie could teach the children of neighboring ranchers. Simple dreams, modest ambitions, but meaningful because they would build them together. Later, as Winnie prepared for bed, she stood at her window looking out at the star-filled Nevada sky. She thought of the frightened woman who had stepped off the train in Genoa just weeks ago, fleeing one danger only to find herself facing another. That woman could never have imagined the happiness she would find here in this remote valley, with a man whose quiet strength and unwavering decency had shown her what true partnership could be. The wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church in Genoa, with Martha beaming proudly from the front pew and Joe Blackfoot standing as Bryce's best man. Abigail Palmer, the schoolteacher who had offered friendship to Winnie during her brief stay at the boarding house, served as bridesmaid. Winnie wore a simple dress of ivory silk that Martha had helped her make, with wildflowers from the valley woven into her hair. When she spoke her vows, her voice was clear and certain, carrying to every corner of the small church filled with townsfolk who had come to witness the union of Bryce Xavier and the mail-order bride who had defied Harold Dempsey. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared, and as Bryce kissed his bride, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the congregation. The celebration afterward was held at Martha's boarding house, with tables set up in the garden and music provided by local musicians. Dancing and feasting continued well into the evening, the entire town seemingly determined to mark this joyful occasion with proper enthusiasm. As the newlyweds prepared to depart for the ranch that would now be their shared home, Martha pulled Winnie aside for a private word. "I always prayed Bryce would find someone who could understand his wounded spirit," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Someone strong enough to stand beside him through whatever life brings. I couldn't have chosen better myself." Winnie embraced her new sister-in-law warmly. "Thank you for welcoming me from the first day. Your kindness made all the difference." "Just be happy," Martha replied. "That's all the thanks I need." The journey back to the ranch was made magical by the full moon illuminating the landscape in silvery light. A new barn was already under construction, thanks to the help of Joe and his kinsmen, and the cabin had been expanded with a small addition that would serve as Bryce's workshop during the winter months. As they crossed the threshold of what was now their home, Bryce swept Winnie into his arms, making her laugh in surprise. "Isn't this tradition?" he asked with a grin. "So I've heard," she replied, looping her arms around his neck, "though I never expected to experience it myself." "Get used to unexpected joys, Mrs. Xavier," Bryce told her as he carried her into the cabin. "I plan to fill our life with them." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Winnie traced the outline of Bryce's face with gentle fingers. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting?" she asked softly. "If you hadn't been at the station that day." "But I was," Bryce reminded her, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "And you were brave enough to trust a stranger who told you not to go with the man you'd traveled thousands of miles to marry." "The best decision I ever made," Winnie said with certainty. "The second best," Bryce corrected, smiling in the darkness. "The best was agreeing to become my wife." 5 years later, the Xavier Ranch had grown considerably. The herd now numbered over 100 cattle, and the original cabin had been expanded into a comfortable home with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and even a small library filled with books ordered from San Francisco. Winnie stood on the porch, watching as Bryce taught their 4-year-old son William to ride his pony in the corral. Young Will had his father's dark hair and serious eyes, but his mother's determined spirit and love of books. Beside Winnie, 2-year-old Emma played with wooden blocks, her chestnut curls bouncing as she concentrated on building a tower. Martha visited regularly, always bringing treats for the children and news from town. Genoa had grown in the years since Harold Dempsey's death, with new businesses opening and more families settling in the area. Martha's boarding house remained a popular stopping place for travelers, though she now had help running it a widower named Thomas Grant, who had gradually become more than just her business partner. Joe Blackfoot and his family remained their closest neighbors and dearest friends. His son, now a young man of 16, often helped Bryce with the cattle, and in return received lessons in reading and mathematics from Winnie, who had indeed established a small school on the ranch that served children from several neighboring families. Life wasn't always easy. The Nevada winters could be brutal, and the work of running a ranch never ceased. There had been losses along the way: cattle taken by disease, crops damaged by early frost, a fire that had threatened their home during a particularly dry summer. But through it all, Bryce and Winnie had faced each challenge together, their bond only strengthening with each obstacle overcome. The bruised and frightened woman who had stepped off that train in Genoa had blossomed into a confident, capable rancher's wife, respected throughout the territory for her kindness, intelligence, and quiet strength. As Will finished his riding lesson and ran toward the house, his small face alight with pride, Bryce followed at a more measured pace. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at his family with undisguised love. "What do you think, Mama?" Will called eagerly. "Did you see me ride all by myself?" "I certainly did," Winnie confirmed, smiling at her son's enthusiasm. "You're becoming quite the horseman." "Like Papa," Will declared with certainty. "Even better," Bryce said, ruffling his son's hair affectionately. "You started younger than I did." As Will ran off to tell Emma about his achievement, Bryce climbed the steps to join Winnie on the porch. His arm slipped naturally around her waist, drawing her close against his side. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, as if needing reassurance that the life they had built together truly fulfilled her. Winnie leaned her head against his shoulder, watching their children play in the warm afternoon sunlight. "Completely," she assured him. "More than I ever dreamed possible." And it was true. The mail-order bride who had stepped off the train with Bruises had found not just safety but love, family, and a sense of purpose in this wild, beautiful land. All because a cowboy had looked at her injured face and declared, "You're not going to him." It had been the first time in her life that someone had put her welfare above convention, above expectation, above what was easy or convenient. That simple act of decency had changed everything, opening the door to a life filled with the kind of happiness she had once thought existed only in the novels she loved to read. As the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and purple, Bryce pressed a kiss to Winnie's temple. "I love you, Winifred Xavier," he said softly, "today and always." "And I love you," she replied, turning in his arms to look up into the face that had become as familiar and necessary to her as her own heartbeat. "My protector, my partner, my home." Together, they watched the sun set on another day in the life they had built, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow might bring, they would face it as they had faced everything since that fateful day at the train station side by side. hand in hand, two hearts beating as one in the vast and unforgiving beauty of the American West.